We've got the fantastic Laura Overton from the Emerging Stronger team and the fantastic Malcolm Taylor, who's the Senior People Development Manager from the Met Office, who happens also to be a Go One customer, which is a double win for us. So today we're talking about smarter ways of cultivating learning in workplace communities. But before we get started, just from a logistics perspective, the more interactive we can make this, the better. We've got a couple of polls during this session, and those will trigger our responses, but the more inclusive we can get, the more interactive we can get, the better. So if you've not scanned already, if you can obviously scan the QR code, then that would be absolutely fantastic, and then you can take part in those polls as well. But before we get to the first poll, to just put this particular into context, so obviously today's enterprise collaboration tools provide us with a fertile ground for us to both grow and develop as we work. And that also helps us shape and learn together. And they basically then open up opportunities for that self-directed learning piece. But obviously, like many things, those can become quite overwhelming as content and communities come flying in at us from lots of different angles. So what we want to do then is to first of all start off with a poll to get you involved. So how are you using workplace communities to nurture your learning? So there are 4 options here. We'd like you to choose one of those options. So we provide live events using Teams or other forms. We provide content at a point of need in workplace communities, a combination of both A and B, or D, proactively build and support communities of practice. So whilst we're waiting for everybody to choose and vote, either here in person or online, any particular things that you think are maybe going to be a surprise or an obvious response?
I think the live thing might not come out as high as I would think. I think we're all a bit Teams fatigued, so kind of more time in front of a screen with our colleagues can be a bit of a challenge. So maybe that's, I don't know.
I think it's really interesting with these communities. We've got things like Slack, we've got Teams, we've got all of those environments where we're all coming in together. But the problem is that everything's coming at us. Everything's coming at us. And I've seen a lot of people using them for great content, but then we're kind of competing as well. So I'm super interested in this. Combination. Majority at the moment, it's a combination of like taking our classroom and putting that into those spaces because people are moving around as much, and taking our content and putting that into the space. So that's really interesting there. I'm just looking for the fourth color. Looking for those who are using things like communities of practice and encouraging people to talk and speak with each other. So brilliant that we've got an online audience with us. Hello, and we'd love to get your feedback as well on this and to see what are you doing with these communities too. Because where's that fourth color? It's interesting for me.
Yeah. No, I think it's as times maybe evolved. So obviously at the beginning of the pandemic, people are obviously using Times a little bit more. There's a bit, it was talked about obviously the Teams fatigue as a result of that. And maybe there's a hesitance or a reservation to kind of build in those communities of practice, because sometimes we have to get the basics right. And because maybe we're still learning from that, maybe that's, why there's a potential reservation. But it's a real surprise to me that, as a result, that's not popped up at all.
But it's a combination really of, it reflects, I think, what we're used to doing as learning and development professionals. We're used to providing content, we're used to providing classroom programs, and we're not necessarily used to kind of helping the community to learn from each other. So I find that quite interesting.
Yeah, so treat for you. Malcolm obviously works at the Met Office. So it'll be really interesting to kind of hear your thoughts, Malcolm, just around how you kind of harness those, how you harness those communities for learning. There we go.
You was right there, Craig. So kind of, I just want to talk a bit about Met Office and our values. And one of our core 5 values is this: we keep evolving. And I think with the kind of onset of the pandemic a couple of years ago, it really helped us actually kind of fast track some of our plans that we've had for a long time in terms of moving a lot of our content more into that community space. So we've had communities of practice stood up for quite a long time now, and I think what we recognised years ago was that communities of practice and communities of learning are happening all the time. We just don't have a formal name wrapped around it. So we started to formalise some of our communities of practice, and the pandemic helped us not only integrate some of that enterprise technology, kind of using LMS and all of that stuff, but we started to really leverage the technology that's out there and use it as an enabler in the space. And kind of we've seen some great results, which I'll talk a little bit about later. But yeah, really feeding and linking our learning kind of programs into our values that kind of tie into our purpose has really helped us land some of our new approaches with our communities of practice. Again, just kind of this way we're better together. It's kind of this fits really well with our communities of practice. So, my organisation, it's kind of split into two. It's kind of real academia and it's real commercially driven as well. Academia are really tied into that traditional way of learning, classroom-based stuff. Pandemic didn't allow that. They had to learn online, and it kind of started to really force change upon some of my colleagues. And it kind of, like I say, it really helped us fast-track this stuff. And as we're better together, we started to see that actually within the communities of practice, we could have specific channels, but also like really specialist interest groups dedicated to learning. So not only learning within communities, but bringing other people in and connecting them. And what we was really conscious with our technology was not another channel, not another place we've got to go and visit. So we really started to look at how do we integrate this stuff so that people can go into one location to access all the information they need, whether that's an informal conversation, that's a bit of learning, or a course, or a bit of e-learning, or whatever it may be. So yeah, that we're better together stuff's really worked well for us.
And then excitingly, we live it and breathe it was the next one.
Yeah, and kind of, I think there is a thing about within my profession is we're great at telling people, but do we actually role model this stuff? And I think this we live and breathe it. We really do have to role model it in the organisation. So, like I said, there's a specialist interest groups in now 17 professions that we've got stood up, and there's a part for us to play in kind of really championing the stuff that's going on in the learning and development space in the organisation. So, one of the communities, and again I'll talk a little bit about some of the impacts of this, is we have a thing called the Link, which is dedicated to line management and aspirational managers. And we've had that running for about 3 years now. It equates to about 650 of our staff access it, and people are really active in this space. So not only like how do you apply a policy to kind of some of that informal learning that we do, what is manager's discretion, how do you define that? And really generating conversations around topics like that, it's kind of been really fruitful for us. So yeah, we live and breathe. It's about role modelling and role modelling these kind of approaches in the organisation.
Yeah.
And are there any other impacts of the stuff that you're doing around this space that you can share?
Yeah, I think kind of understanding when things have run their course. I think sometimes we create these things and we put a bit of time and energy into it, and when we realise it's run its course, we kind of have our fingers into it. We don't want to let it go, and we keep just walk away from it. Know when things have served a purpose and move on. I think as organisations, quite often, we keep chucking time and resource at something, flogging a dead horse, right? It's kind of, it's done, move on to your next thing.
Okay, fab. So we've got another poll, I think, coming up. I think it's a word cloud, actually, that should be appearing if you're obviously dialed into the app. And this is particularly around you thinking about how have workplace communities really helped you learn. So if you are obviously signed onto the app, if you've not done also already, there is where you can scan the QR code in front of you, but there should be a word cloud that should be appearing if technology is our friend and playing the ball today.
Just while that's happening,
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting when you talk about that community, the Link community, and how much we personally learn from being in these spaces and what we learn and how we learn. So I'm really interested in the response to how those communities are helping you learn what you need to do your job. I think it's fantastic about that question, like what does manager's discretion mean? It's like, well, that's up to my discretion and what that means. That kind of, the fact that we can learn from each other's experiences, I think is one of the things that I would probably put into this cloud about how, I'm connected with various different people, and it might be a big community, like I've got a very big LinkedIn community and we're learning together in that environment, or a very small community, the one that I work with the Emerging Stronger program. And we're in Australia and America, and it's just 3 of us working together, and the way that we spur each other on with different ideas and post sort of and challenge each other. So I think I would put community
Yeah.
challenge as some of my words of how I'm learning out of these spaces. What words would you put in?
If you haven't typed anything in, start typing away. Here we go. There we are.
I think there's something about kind of innovation and diversity of thought. Kind of, we operate quite a lot in our silos, and I think communities have really helped kind of bring people together that probably would not normally work together. So kind of it really has driven kind of diversity, inclusion, and innovation through our approach.
Mine would be connected.
Okay.
Yeah, I love it. I love it when you feel more connected, whether you are a global organization or you're kind of quite local, because you just feel a sense of belonging in terms of that community, don't you? And through those connections, you then build relationships, and with building relationships, you then build trust, and from that trust, you then start to ask lots more questions. And so obviously it's a fantastic evolvement then of the types of things. So interesting enough to hear just some of the words. Are there any other common ones maybe that you've been seeing at Met Office, Malcolm? So we've got knowledge, sharing, generosity, validation.
I think that you touched on it there, Craig, about the engagement. We have definitely seen a kind of increased engagement in conversation as a result of people having access to this stuff. I think most organisations have a wealth of knowledge and a wealth of information that's not generally accessible to everyone. Kind of our approach has really opened that up. It's lifted the lid and kind of really helped people engage in content right across the organisation.
What I love about it, one of the first words that flashed up, I don't know whether you noticed it, was the word generosity. And in fact, we were talking about this just before we came on board, is that actually other people's generosity of time actually really can kind of burst something in us, an aha moment. It feels as though someone's with us in that space. And our generosity to others also can do the same for them. So there is this kind of culture that really kind of can help with this kind of space. So I love the fact that word came up first. So whoever put that in,
thank you.
Super cool. Thank you.
Great stuff. Now, obviously in the world of L&D, we love a good story. And so this is why I'm really excited about to share this next piece. So Laura is now going to be sort of talking through cultivating learning in workplace communities. So yeah, if you can talk us through this, it'd be great.
It's more about, when you're talking about our experiences, all of our experiences are different, aren't they, in terms of our own organizations. But what are the principles that we can bring to these new spaces? Because that's effectively, we're working in new spaces. So therefore, we need to work out how we learn in new spaces. So those of you who don't know me, my background is in researching how high-performing learning organizations deliver better results. And they, to be honest, the high-performing teams are harnessing these new spaces and have been, to be honest, for decades. It hasn't just been COVID. So what we wanted to do was kind of say, what are the principles that they're using to make the most advantage of these opportunities that like Slack and Teams have for learning? And so we were kind of using this gardening analogy. And there was a few principles I'd like to share with you. And you can download this tool that we created. GoOne has published it for us. So this is all free. You can work through the different points. But the first thing was about understanding the purpose and the timing of that purpose as well. You know, there's a moment right now to link the managers together. Maybe it's appraisal system or whatever it is, but the timing and the purpose is really important. What's most relevant for the organization right now, that where we can add the most value. Also, there's a sense of preparation. You know, what are the growing conditions? So if you've got an environment like Slack or Teams, and it's so overwhelming, then you need to be aware that whatever you plant in that environment to do with learning may or may not take off. So really understanding what's working in the ground at the moment is really important before we kind of plant learning stuff. But the next thing really, once we kind of understand the earth, the ground, what it's good for, is actually to sow the right seeds. And if we look at the next slide, then the idea of this is that learning is complex. It's not just about let's deliver content, let's deliver knowledge. It's about reflection. It's about practice. It's about questions. It's about trying something, getting it wrong, working at it, moving on. And that linked community that you were just talking about isn't just a place where you're sowing content for managers to get better at what they're doing. It's a vibrant environment. And, learning experiences, learning activities aren't just about us telling people how to do things, however smartly we design that experience. So for me, the community and the high-performing teams, they're really sowing all kinds of things. A question, once someone's finished a program, they're back in the community. Let's seed it with a question. Let's seed it with some nudges. Let's seed it with some practice. Let's seed it with asking people to share a video of how they've applied what they've learned. So our questions and what we sow into that ground can really, it opens it up. In the classroom space, we can only sow one thing and maybe a little limited practice. But when you're in the workplace and community, there are so many more seeds for learning that we can sow. But the next thing is that we also, if we plant a seed, you've got to nurture it. You've got to make sure it's not surrounded by weeds. You've got to thin it out at some time. You've got to feed it. So our role as learning professionals, and again, the high-performing learning teams are really strong at this. It's incredible, the percentage of those who are getting better business results, who are very focused on saying, I'm going to cull this piece of content from this environment because it's no longer relevant, and I'm going to bring in something new and fresh. So the whole idea on the next slide is of nurturing and watering, feeding, pruning, cutting back, shaping. Our role as learning professionals, it's not about us becoming community managers, but it's about us bringing our understanding of the process of learning into these spaces and being released. And I think you were giving us some really cool examples of how you and your team are going in. And when you shut something down, actually now's the time to finish it, because we need to release people and say, you don't have to be in this space anymore. And then the final thing I want to share with you, and again, it's in the tool, because what we've done is we've created this tool that allows you to work through what works for you in this environment. And the next slide actually shows us about this concept of harvesting. So if learning is ripening in that environment, if things are taking place, if behavior is changing and habits are changing, then we need to be able to spot that. So the harvesting concept in this tool is about us learning how to tune in to what's working in our organization right now. And is it something that we kind of gather the crop? Are people all sharing with each other how they've improved management by discretion? Are they sharing? Are they encouraged to share how it's improved their team performance? That's data. That's insight. We can gather that in to feed our own environment. If they're questioning a whole range of different things that actually is showing us that we need to develop something more intentional, then that is another way of harvesting learning in this environment. So I think it's really important for us to kind of grasp that concept of harvesting. And if you could just go on to the next slide here. These principles of, and I really welcome your questions on this, because we'd love to discuss what this might mean for you. So if you've got questions, please pop that in there. But the principles that we're talking about here are really evidence-informed principles that work for learning professionals in all different types of sectors. And one of the impacts that comes as a result of looking at learning in these spaces in new ways is the fact that it does encourage, Craig, you were talking earlier about that self-directed learning. People want to share. They're not being forced to. They're not being prevented to, because it's not the right culture of learning. So I think that's really important. And it does improve learning transfer in a number of these different areas as well. So hopefully that kind of makes a little bit of sense to people. And this tool, as I say, is available for you. And if you use it, please let any of us know what works, what doesn't, what you'd add in. These are experiments, these tools, to say, okay, let's do something. Yeah. Let's put it into practice.
Yeah, fantastic.
But if anyone got any questions coming through, then Craig.
Yeah, so if you should have on your app at the moment, we'd like to obviously do a bit of interaction here. We can fill the gap whilst we're waiting for you to obviously put this in, but this is our opportunity to collaborate now and share with us, how you're putting some of those things into practice when you're thinking about cultivating, you're already cultivating learning in some of your workplace communities. So if we think about it, maybe a quick question to Malcolm here whilst we're waiting for some questions to come through. Like, when is a really good time and maybe when is a really bad time that we're utilising workplace communities?
Good question. I think one of the things we started to learn in our organisation is that communities need to be organic. I think you try and force this stuff, it can be quite a challenge to get people's buy-in on it. But once you do start getting that interest and that thirst for kind of learning and engagement, try and put a bit of formal structure around it. You mentioned community managers. We've actually got one community manager that kind of collaborates right across our 17 professions, working with our heads of profession, because we have some kind of dedicated people, kind of standard setters, if you like, giving that a voice of authority. But we also work with people like our internal comms teams as well. So we kind of really take a campaign approach to the type of content that we're pushing out here. So it's not only just about a bit of e-learning or whatever, it's about a bit of staff communication that links into the kind of well-being initiatives, all the other initiatives that the organisation is trying to push out. Ultimately, we try and link it back to the corporate strategy and the kind of corporate strategic actions and all of that stuff. So kind of really trying to create golden threads between what you're doing on a daily basis and how you can contribute to the wider organisation's success. Because ultimately, that's why we're all here to a lesser degree, is to kind of create an organisation success. So yeah, just kind of putting the feelers out. I think you'll kind of let it grow organically, but once you do start to get that appetite, try and put a bit of structure around it, because it helps create that fresh content that's constantly going.
Yeah, we've got some questions coming through, so if you want to continue pushing those questions through, because also I'd like to tap into your industry experience, Laura, just around maybe examples of where you're seeing certain organisations maybe seeing the sowing, nurturing, harvesting community happening. We've got a first question now. So do you think different generations or ages learn in different communities? And how do you make that work in one business? Great question, whoever posted that. Go for it, Laura.
I did a lot of research looking at these generational differences, and about 50,000 learners across a number of years. There aren't that many generational differences. There really aren't. It all comes down to whether or not people are getting something that's relevant to them. And that's the most critical thing. It doesn't, and also it doesn't depend on their seniority. With those who are less senior in the organisation, those that are new in the organisation, sometimes they are more nervous about connecting and engaging because they don't want to look stupid. So they might need more nurturing in that space. So actually, that's a slightly counter to the young generation are going to be in there and the old generation aren't going to be in there. It's all down to whether or not we keep it relevant to the problem, digging into the purpose of that community that's there. And getting people to model it, giving people permission, getting older generations or more experienced to be the first in. It's not that they are doing something, it's just that they are giving others permission to speak. And it's kind of cultivating that environment of permission. So there actually isn't a big generational pushback on getting involved in this space. It's a pushback if they don't think it's relevant. Yeah. And that's the same at every age.
And I think sometimes you just got to, I was just going to say, sometimes you just got to try these things, right? Yeah. Maybe try it on a smaller group, but you just got to try and test it. And it makes me think about some recent conversations we've had with some of the newer members of the team who are, first of all, experiencing using LinkedIn, doing a post on LinkedIn, and there's a nervousness around what happens if I don't get enough reactions, what happens if nobody comments, does that mean that somebody is not interested in what I'm saying? Should I be looking at the amount of expressions? And it's the same thing when we're utilising those communities of practice, is you've just got to start somewhere, right? Yeah. Don't overcomplicate it, keep it simple, and kind of go from there. Which kind of leads on, I think, because we've got a couple of questions. One is around how can we start to implement workplace communities. Now, I know obviously if people have scanned, then they can obviously download that, which is absolutely fantastic. But is there maybe like a top tip as to what that initial starting point would be?
Yeah, it's quite that last question there about smaller organisations are kind of linked as well for me. And I think try and not start grand. We started with a hot topics and having a community of interest rather than a community of practice. So kind of started to kind of listen to staff feedback. What's the common things that are coming up? So manager's discretion was one of the hot topics that we actually started with. And once you start getting people engagement and they're starting to see the value in being involved in that, you're able to then start building on it. So yeah, don't go big, start small. Just start with a hot topic, see what types of engagement you get back, and be prepared to fail when it's okay to fail.
And don't feel you have to set up your own community of practice. I think that's particularly in this tool, we're not saying this is a tool for setting up a community of practice. This is a tool for nurturing learning in the spaces where people are working.
Yeah.
So it's about learning in the flow of work. So if people are already gathering, how can you support them? How can you encourage? How can you surface learning in those spaces? And I think that's what makes, this is really exciting. We don't have to have the right learning culture because it's a working culture.
Yeah.
This is a place where people are working. So, do we see that piece of content that we've got from our library, because it just will hit the spot for the conversation that's going on right now, where people are grappling with an issue. We're just there at the right place and the right time. And I think that's the great opportunity. We don't have to be experts in this.
No, I'm smiling to myself. I just remember an article we used, one of our hot topics was, I like to be quite provocative because ultimately it kind of generates more conversation. And I kind of dropped this article into a Teams chat once around 6 traits of a toxic manager. Oh, it's unbelievable because obviously people could resonate with the people, right? And it kind of really generated conversation. And that was one of the things we've done early days that really started to get that involvement. So yeah, be provocative. It generates conversation for sure.
That's seeds of controversy.
Yeah,
And when you get an emotional reaction, and we all know when we look at learning science, that emotion is important for us to be inspired to actually change. So again, I'm sorry, I get so excited about this topic because suddenly the work environment releases us to experiment in this space. The classroom and the physical space, we weren't free to do that. We weren't free to try these things. And yet it's so in line with the way that people learn and the way that people work. It's incredible.
Yeah, and I would sometimes look within. You've got some fantastic subject matter experts within your organization from lots of different divisions that probably have that wealth of knowledge, which, if utilized and shared in the right capacity in the right way, would be really useful to other people. And sometimes, as I said before, it's just about keeping it simple. We have obviously access to lots of content, and one of those is, we've got a provider who, has a massive library of podcasts, and we've got another one that's got a massive library, which is Blinkist, a massive library of book extracts. And we're starting to see those social communities of learning utilizing that, whereby they say, right, let's choose a title for the week, let's have a virtual book club. You've got all week to watch watch or listen to that particular extract, and then we can discuss it. And then we can take that a step further as part of being part of that community, where we're now saying, how have you transferred that learning to practice? What have you learned? What difference has it made? And, and through some self-marketing of doing things like that, people are like, oh, that sounds interesting. I'll come and get involved. And then inherently, you've then got people learning without actually realizing they're learning, because they're doing something that entices them and excites them.
And you know what? The secret of that is that, yes, it's a community, but it's a book club. People get that. It hasn't got the word learning in it. But by us just being in there and seeding those questions, those reflections, who's tried this? What difference has it made? Those are the seeds. But the harvest for us as learning professionals is suddenly you get all of this insight into what people are doing. And we struggle so much with how do we prove our return on investment. We just have to ask the right question in the right place. And asking it in the book club rather than at the end of our course suddenly releases all of us to celebrate the change that's going on. So, harvesting ROI becomes a hell of a lot easier when we start to work with these communities. So,
yeah,
and I love that book club example.
Oh yeah, it goes down a treat. As we're kind of coming to time and we just want to wrap up, we just want to know if there's kind of anything that you want to share in obviously the sort of the chat function there, about maybe one thing that you can either share with us, or something that you've maybe learned today that you can obviously take back to the workplace. I mean, we have obviously had a fantastic, over the last couple of months, being able to work together a bit more importantly. Is there anything that you've learned as our little community, where we're constantly sharing knowledge from what we're learning from either our customers, our employees, or lots of the organisations that you work with, Laura?
Well, as you're right. So we're all in small communities, and we'll probably, those who are physically here, sorry, those that aren't, will be able to have a community around that drinks table that's been put up behind us. But we can share, we inspire each other. And I think for us to be willing to learn and continue to learn in those spaces actually releases us to experiment a little bit more. We've experimented with this theme a few different times, but we felt safe to do that. And I think because the community of trust is there, that allows us to experiment. And then I think we've all learned and grown as a result of that. So I think small communities create trust. And we need that as learning professionals to give ourselves permission to try something new. So thank you guys for that.
Fantastic. Anything from you, Malcolm?
I think I just concur what Laura said, really, just kind of building that trust and just trying new things, and just don't be afraid. What have you got? What have you got to lose? It goes back to the old thing: if you're going to fail, just make sure you fail fast, rather than kind of lots of resources at it. So yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining, everybody. We are all on LinkedIn if you need to get in contact with us, but more importantly, we also obviously have the Cultivating Workplace Communities for you to download. There are some other tools on there as well, aren't there? We could do a quick plug here, surely.
All right.
Whilst we get everybody in,
Okay.
we're just filling up the bubbles and the beer behind you.
Filling up the wine glasses. And so this is a treat for those who are dialing in. There are, on the Go One site, there are a number of the Emerging Stronger toolkits, but the one that I'd like to perhaps recommend to you is the Power Hour, which is actually a meeting in a box that you can give to line managers for them to have smarter conversations to encourage their teams to collaborate. We haven't even had time to kind of step into the role of managers in these spaces. So there is a tool and a structure and something, again, for you to experiment with. So there's plenty there. We've had great fun in developing these for you guys.
Fantastic. So have we got any questions from our in-person audience at all that they want to ask? Any at all?
We've been plugging the drinks at the back.
They are. We're waiting for that cork to be popped.
You mentioned the drinks too soon, I think.
All right. Well, all that remains is to thank Laura and to thank Malcolm and thank everybody who's joined us either online or in person. Thank you very much for your time. We hope you enjoyed the session.
Thank you.